This is Michael Popok, Legal AF After Dark. You know what that means? That means it's time to talk about a recent episode of Legal AF. In this one, midweek, it was Karen Friedman Agnifilo on one side. She's a former prosecutor. Me on the other, a current defense lawyer. And we talked about Georgia, specifically what we're observing with Judge McAfee, how he's running his courtroom, the motion that was filed for emergency motion for protective order, the revelation that came out about who leaked the proffered videos of Donald Trump's former lawyers and now convicted criminals, and everything else leading up to a likely March or April or May of 2024 trial date against Donald Trump. Take a listen. Let's talk about Georgia before we launch into what we thought was the latest news. I'll just do two little quick updates. I did a hot take a while ago about Harrison Floyd, who was the chair of Black Voices for Trump. He was the guy that couldn't get out of jail originally on bond because he couldn't find a lawyer when he got indicted. And then we also learned that he was up on charges for assaulting a federal officer when he was being served with a subpoena to appear in front of a grand jury for Jack Smith's DC election interference case. You know, that guy. And then he spent the last 2 months or 3 months using social media to bash Fani Willis, attack her appearance, and then go after witnesses. And Fani Willis has had enough as the Fulton County DA, and she has filed a motion today to revoke his bond and send him back to jail, where he can sit in the Rice Street jail right next to the courthouse from now until his trial, maybe in 2024, maybe in 2025. We'll find out. But she's had enough. Her hand is under her chin, and it's now time to teach these defendants who are out on bail and bond a lesson. In addition, speaking of Georgia, we now have, based on new filings, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the mother and daughter team, who have not only sued Rudy Giuliani for defamation, but have already won because Rudy Giuliani was found basically in default and a judgment entered against him by the judge in District of Columbia, pardon me, Judge Beryl Howell, on defamation and punitive damages. And the only thing left for a trial is going to be how big of a check the jury is going to make Rudy Giuliani write. And we now have the numbers, and the numbers that Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, these Fulton County election workers who were defamed, accused of voter fraud when they were doing nothing of the kind, they were just doing their civic duty, is somewhere between $15 and $43 million. Which I know, what little I know about Rudy Giuliani's finances, he doesn't have all of that money, but they will take everything that he does have, including his apartment in New York and his condo near Mar-a-Lago in Florida and everything else. So that's the quick update. Let's go to the event today. Karen, you had a chance, as I did, but you take the lead on the hearing on the emergency motion for protective order filed by Fani Willis because a whole bunch of proffer videos of Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis and the bail bondsman, as I like to call them, were leaked. You know, these hour-long videos of the testimony they gave to the state attorney in order to support their case and to get their plea deal was leaked to the media. At the time, we were like, who leaked these? I mean, they're goldmine for us. We got to talk about them. Who leaked them and why? And we learned today in the course of that hour-long hearing. Why don't you tell everybody, Karen, out there, what happened at the hearing and what was the confession that was made during it?
Sure, I would be happy to, but I want to go back to something you talked about just now, which is how Fani Willis asked the court to revoke the bond of Mr.
Sure.
Floyd, only because this one really, really just gets under my skin. Because when you read the reasons Fani Willis asked that his bond be revoked, so really what she's saying is, this is a defendant who's out on bond or bail, meaning he has paid a certain amount of money to be allowed to go out with certain restrictions. And those restrictions are, and there's always like different ones for different people, you know, and whatever they are here, the restrictions are basically you can't threaten witnesses, you can't attack them, and you can't do inappropriate things on social media. And then in her motion, she cites to the various social media postings that she said violate his conditions, right? Things about threatening witnesses, where he says things like, it's over. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger needs to call his lawyer. He's about to go through some things. Or things like, just going on and on, right? Different things. And at one point, there's even, we have to shout out to MeidasTouch. There's even a MeidasTouch posting here where it says, during her proffer session before Georgia prosecutors, Jenna Ellis, if you can see it, it's great, right? I love that MeidasTouch is making its way into the DA Fani Willis's motion papers on page 8. But really what upsets me about this and what gets under my skin about this is it shows the way Donald Trump is being treated differently than everybody else and every other defendant, because what he does is just as bad, if not worse, than what Mr. Floyd does. But somehow nobody puts him in. Nobody incarcerates him. They just, not only that, we're fighting over gag orders because he can't be stopped. And so if he's going to be out there saying things like, if you coming after me, I'm coming after you, he's setting the tone. You can't put the lower level guy in jail or in prison waiting trial, and Donald Trump continues to get away with it. There are two tiers of justice, in this country, but not in the direction Donald Trump talks about. And so this really, really bothers me that it just demonstrates how he is once again just getting away with things that nobody else would get away with. Because of course, Mr. Floyd should be put in for doing this. So would every other defendant who would ever do something like this. That's exactly what a judge would do and should do. But the fact that we're not doing it with Donald Trump just shows to me how somehow he is being treated differently than everybody else. And that's just not right. And if I were a judge, I don't know that I would do one and not the other, especially if the one that I'd be doing is a much lower level person in all of this, right? Donald Trump is the ringleader. He's the boss. And so they really, I think, and I know everybody is afraid to put Donald Trump in, put him in, but he's not stopping, and somebody has to stop him because lives are in danger as a result of what he does. And Mr. Floyd is doing nothing more than following the lead of his ringleader, Donald Trump. So I just wanted to comment on that.
The interesting thing is that Donald Trump doesn't bash the people that are necessarily the Georgia witnesses. He stays relatively quiet. He only because of McAfee. He only bashes the in places where he knows he can get away with it until he can't, which is the Democratic judges like Chutkin and Goron, Judge Merchan up in New York, or the one, the one that he thinks he's got in his back pocket, Judge Cannon. We'll talk about in another time down in Florida. He really hasn't. Surprisingly, even though there is a gag order per se by Judge McAfee about intimidating witnesses or making comments about witnesses, and remember, McAfee's already decided to make, I think, all the trials there anonymous, mainly because of Donald Trump.
You mean the jurors? I'm
sorry, all the jurors down there anonymous, mainly because of Donald Trump. It's amazing how quiet Donald Trump is and does very little, does no bashing of McAfee as a judge, and doesn't really go after the other potential witnesses. Like, if this was in New York and Powell and Jenna Ellis's leaked things came out, you would see crackpot Sidney Powell, crackpot Jenna Ellis, corrupt right-wing racist vermin. He doesn't do that in Georgia, which is very interesting. One of the reasons I don't think he does it in Georgia is because there is a real fear that is a place where he could get convicted at some point and not be able to have a pardon from a Republican president. I'm not sure he can self-pardon. We'll leave that for another day. But let's keep going.
Sorry, we'll go back to the
let's keep going on Georgia and talk about, do a quick summary of the motion for protective order emergency, the hearing particularly that already happened today, and what we learned from the hearing, and how Judge McAfee runs the courtroom.
Yeah, so Fani Willis turned over discovery, which is witness statements essentially that she has in all forms, and she turned it over to the remaining 14 defense attorneys, like she's supposed to do. And there were some, what they were called unauthorized leaks from, I think it was ABC first and then the Washington Post, and now it's everywhere, from, at the time, an unknown source. And Fani Willis did an emergency application for a protective order. And she said it must be one of the defense attorneys who leaked. And these, she was very disappointed by this. And by filing an emergency order, she got a hearing on a fast pace, which happened the next day. So today there was a broadcast hearing that we all could watch, where all the defense attorneys were present, and it was via Zoom, and it was on whether or not there should be a protective order. Now, there was an application for a protective order previously by Fani Willis on the discovery, but Judge McAfee did not rule on it. So by releasing this information, I don't think it was a violation of anything, because there was no order in place. And so what Fani Willis was asking for was for a protective order, because what she said was, there's no reason to be leaking this other than to intimidate witnesses, right? That's what will happen. And not only that, there will be inappropriate information that is out there in the public realm. And the reason it's inappropriate, and basically what was leaked were video recordings of the proffer sessions, or of the conversations between prosecutors and the defendants who have now pled guilty and are cooperating. So what the prosecutors did, and this is done in certain jurisdictions and in certain cases, is they put them under oath, made them swear to tell the truth, and asked them questions and videotaped it, so that there's a record for all time of what they have said. And normally those video recordings, those would be considered hearsay at trial, because they're out of court statements being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. They are just pure hearsay. And so those typically wouldn't come in to evidence. So why would you record them? You would record them because if they change their testimony later, you can confront them with it because it's under oath. You can cross-examine them with it. And so it's a good you do it for a reason, right? You preserve their testimony for a reason, and it's a good thing that you did it. But Fani Willis is upset that it was released because there are, when you go to trial, when you ask questions, there are lots of objections, right? And the judge may or may not allow certain information in. But if that information is already shown to the public and out there, and the jury knows about it, you run the risk of a jury considering extraneous evidence in the jury box, which they're not allowed to do. They're only allowed to consider the evidence that's before them. And so as a prosecutor, you want to do everything you can to prevent all this information to come out, so that you don't somehow poison your jury pool. You don't make it harder to pick juries. And, you don't want to, it's just not a good thing to have information out there that might not ever come in at trial. So she did the right thing by asking for a protective order and for asking for one on an emergency basis. Her protective order that she asked for was a limited one. It wasn't just for all discovery. It was for things that are sensitive or have personal identifying information or confidential business records, the proffer videos, that kind of stuff. Most of the defense attorneys said, we don't think that, and McAfee, who every time I see him, I am more and more impressed with him. I think he's an excellent judge. I like the way he's not at all intemperate. He's very much respectful, smart, knows the law, gives people a chance to speak, but is completely in control. He's kind of exactly what you want a judge to be, frankly. Most of the defense attorneys, and he went one by one to ask them, most of them said, look, Judge, we don't think a protective order is necessary, but if one is, then we consent to the one that Fani Willis has proposed and will abide by it, because it is narrowly tailored, right? She's not just saying everything. We think it's as reasonable. And, as a lawyer, why fight about everything, right? When you want to show you're reasonable to a judge, so that somehow they'll give you certain things too. So that sort of seemed like what was going on there. Every once in a while you'd have a defense attorney say something like, this isn't necessary because X, Y, and Z. And if it's wrong, what they're saying, the judge corrects them. He's like, well, you're not, it's not exactly true because that's already taken care of. Like, he made sure that the record was absolutely correct. And I love that he did that. And then we get to the defense attorney who, for Mr. Miller, for Misty Hampton, and because I thought this was just going to be okay, judge, no problem. One by one, they were saying, we don't object, it'll be fine. But this one was a little bit, I don't want to say dramatic, but it was like he confessed. He said, he basically said, I want to be transparent with the court so nobody else is blamed. He said, first of all, this is not necessary and I won't consent. So that was your first hint that he was going to be a little bit different from the rest of the pack. But he said, but I want to be transparent with the court so nobody else gets blamed for this. I did it. I released the videos to one outlet. And, he's like, I did it because the 4 people who did the proffers, who stood in front of you, Judge, they pled guilty. And to hide these proffers, to show all that went into the plea is misleading. And it misleads the public about what goes on. And 2 people actually helped my client. And the public needs to know that. So, please keep that into consideration. And Judge McAfee shot him down and said, this isn't a trial that the American people, this isn't a trial that you do, it's not a trial of public opinion, basically, and he said to him at one point, that's a good slogan, that the public has a right to know, but is there any case law that says that pretrial discovery should be part of the public record? And he's like, no, that's not, that doesn't exist. Anyway, it was the way the way McAfee did it was basically like, look, this is supposed to be a trial in the court of law, not a trial of court of opinion. Nice slogan. But he didn't yell at him or say anything. He just kind of said, he just sort of held his feet to the fire a little bit. But then we got to, it was interesting. I was a lawyer for media organizations who they did not want a protective order because, look, they like they like these leaks, frankly. And that was an interesting legal back and forth about what the law is there, and the 11th Circuit law about there's no public right to discovery, and back and forth. And, the press, they really, really want it. And so I thought that was also a very interesting back and forth. And the judge said he's going to rule, I think, tomorrow on this. I think there's, at one point the judge basically signaled that he would do the full protective order, but because he says there's so much information, and why argue, why come back and forth about, is this one protected or this one not? This just leaves it up to, not only to subjectivity, but to litigation. Why not just blanket all of it? So we'll see what he does. I think not only is he going to grant a protective order, I think there's actually a chance that he might do the full protective order, not just the one Fani Willis put in. But what do you think, Popok?
First of all, he's granting the protective order because the parties already submitted an agreed order. I think the interesting, the things that triggered other things during the hearing is we started with David Schaefer's lawyers, who was the former head of the GOP for Georgia before he got indicted, getting together with the other defendants, including Donald Trump's, to submit and work through with the Attorney General, with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, a proposed agreed order. In retrospect, based on the comment that you just mentioned about the judge, the DA probably should have just swung for the fences and went for the whole, as you said, protective order, which is what they originally wanted as they filed it, was all of the discovery information was going to be covered by the protective order. They wouldn't have to pick and choose which pieces of it. And even certain highly sensitive pieces like video evidence, people would have to not get a copy of it sent to them. They would have to come down and watch it in the DA's office. When they saw the proposed agreed protective order, which the judge doesn't have to adopt, but generally would, and he has in the past year, they agreed to kind of split it down the middle and let the DA designate some categories of things, some subset of things as sensitive, and then let that issue go to the judge if people don't agree with the designation. And sensitive things would get a certain type of treatment away from the prying eyes of the public and the media. The judge said, you really want to go through all that? all your documents, DA? It was always like, I'll give you the full one. But then, the DA, to their credit, they were like, no, we've agreed upon this. And if the court is okay with it, we have a procedure in place that we think will be fine. A small, very small handful of people said, no, we think we should be able to disseminate all of the discovery information. This is Donald Trump's talking point here, to as wide an audience outside of the courtroom as possible. And the judge, as you've noted, said, why? The trial takes place inside of a courtroom. I get why you need the information to defend your case. I get why, but why, before I've even ruled on the admissibility of any of this information, and before we're even at trial, why do you get to widely disseminate it and try your case in the public? And none of the lawyers, including the one for Misty Hampton, who's the Coffee County former election supervisor, who was involved with the break-in in which they downloaded confidential voter data and just handed it out to Sidney Powell and other people to use inappropriately in lawsuits. Why? What's the case law you have for that? The judge, of course, Misty Hampton's lawyer said, we don't really have any, judge. We just think it's a good idea because the DA has had the lectern all this time, and we want to be able to get our message out there. Like, well, this is not a compelling argument for due process or the right to a fair trial. And I think the reason that he felt compelled and had a moment of where it became a confessional for him, for the lawyer for Misty Hampton, is because just before him, the lawyer for Floyd, who we just talked about at the top as being the subject now of having his bond revoked and being sent back to jail, took tremendous umbrage and was clutching his pearls, as we like to say, about the fact that the district attorney used a typo in one of their emails against them. Look, they didn't write it. They wrote it. The lawyers for Floyd. The lawyers for Floyd were trying to write, apparently, an email to the DA that said, we did not leak the videos. And instead they wrote, we leaked the videos. You can't make this up. Yes, they claimed it was a typo, and they sent an email right after, or some point after, and pointed it out. They don't like the fact that the DA embarrassed them and told the judge, see, they're the leakers. They admitted it right here, whatever. It was like, okay. So he decided on the phone call with the judge, the Zoom boxes, we have pictures of it, 16, 18 lawyers surrounded here, to say, I was aggravated by the fact that the DA wrote about this typo of ours, and I've been fielding phone calls from the media, and I want an apology, and I want the DA to say that I wasn't the leaker. And to which the judge said, well, when we signed up for this case, a certain amount of aggravation went along for the ride. In other words, I love that because it's the judge indicating, I've been aggravated too, but I'm not complaining about it. Because he usually seems very unflappable, the judge in the courtroom. So right after that, after this whole big kerfuffle over who's the leaker, then Misty Hampton's lawyer, just as the judge was about to turn the page and move on to the next lawyer to ask if they agreed or disagreed with the protective order, he said, no, I got to get something off my chest, Your Honor. I was the one that, and if you would have bet me which lawyer representing which client would have been the leaker, Misty Hampton was not on my bingo card at all. That is the one I thought would lay low, try to cut a deal, get out of there with whatever dignity she has intact, cut a deal with Fani Willis, not be the leaker and piss off the very prosecutor that she should be cutting a deal with. Ben and I did a hot take on it, and I happened to go over to her GoFundMe page or whatever she's using. I mean, we won't mention it, but just go find her GoFundMe page. And on that GoFundMe page, where she says she needs to raise $300,000 to pay this lawyer, she's raised $6,000. And all she does is this fawning thing about how what a wonderful, selfless person she is. And she needs help. Here's a note of advice. People get upset sometimes that we give free advice. I'm going to give free advice to Misty Hampton. A, don't be the one that pisses off the prosecutor, and you shouldn't be the one continuing to do Donald Trump's bidding by leaking discovery information and trying to try your case in the public. Here's a better idea. go cut a deal as fast as you can while there's still deals being handed out by the prosecutor and get the heck out of there, right? You're not going to try this case. You're going to lose. There's video evidence of her. I almost gagged, speaking of gagging, Karen, I almost gagged when her lawyer said at the beginning of his little speech, "Oh, I represent my client and she really wants transparency. She's very into transparency." Really? Go watch the video of her deposition in another case in which she completely lies, and it's obvious until video came out showing that she let in the cyber ninjas and the bail bondsmen and other people to go rummaging around the equipment, the election equipment, and tampering with it under her watch, where she lied through her teeth on the deposition under oath until the video came out and it showed she did exactly the opposite of what she said. So I don't want to hear about transparency. My client is so interested in having the media, have access to this. So listen, I agree with you. He's going to grant the protective order. We're not going to see these kind of leaks again, or we're going to be right back in front of this judge, who I think will be a little bit harsher with his rulemaking now that he sets the order in place. All right. Well, if you liked that, and I hope you did, then tune in every Wednesday and Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern time, because we do a curated podcast called, wait for it, Legal AF. And the title is exactly what you think it is. Wednesdays, it's me and Karen Friedman Agnifilo. Saturdays, it's me and Ben Meiselas. And we take on all these kind of topics, 4 or 5 at a time, and do it on audio, on every audio podcast platform you can name, you can shake a stick at, and right here on YouTube. Free subscribe to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel. It helped them get to 2 million free subscribers. If you know us, welcome back. If you never heard of Legal AF before, you just got your first taste of it, and we hope you come back for more. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.